Okay, so yes, I have flipped the title a little bit, but it basically will add up to the same thing, although I think there are some people in the audience that want to ask provocative questions about the nature of art. Can cosmetics actually be viewed as the very origins of art? I'm going to make the argument that they can. So beauty. Beauty, before culture in the animal world, beauty is purely a matter of sexual choice and sexual competition. Most often we see dazzling, fantastic arrays of quite useless ornaments, in the famous case, the classic case of the peacock, and they're displayed by males of the species, apparently evolved in response to the whim of females. Among humans, we also see this kind of multifarious ornamentation, so many extraordinary, elaborate versions of different forms, rather like in the sexual selection animal case, apparently pointless, apparently, for what? It's just as various amongst cultures as among species. These adornments and cosmetics are worn by both sexes, so this is an important difference compared with most animals, but for similar purposes of sexual attraction. But in the human world, body art, artifice, and ornament creates another dimension, which I'm going to describe as beauty magic, borrowing that phrase from Bronislaw Malinowski. It implies beauty magic. The ornamented body is invoking otherworldly powers, spells that have been learned from the ancestors, creating states of taboo or magical potency and protection. These are rituals of social magic. A person is transformed in the eyes of the community. Display here is not just animalistic, competitive, individualistic. People take on identities that have been collectively created and agreed. Adding the ideal to the real, somehow these are fake. They're entering some realm of pretense or fantasy or something in addition to brute reality. The individual is no longer herself alone. One of the very oldest of vegetable-based pigments, henna, provides a perfect example of how these meanings operate at both symbolic and practical social levels. For a Berber bride and her womenfolk around her, henna above all represents fertility and festivity, as befits a bride at her marriage, and it offers magical protection against the evil eye. These symbolic ideas are given a very practical application through the process of women in the bride's and the groom's wedding parties coming together. They spend days preparing dyes and then applying these beautiful designs, enabling the families to get to know each other and perhaps resolving tensions, doubts, or difficulties. For cultures from West Africa, across Mediterranean, North Africa, and the Middle East, right the way to India, henna's a vital ingredient of social networking. If a woman wants to make a friend, she can say so by sending a parcel of henna as a gift. But even older than henna are mineral-based pigments, including primarily earth pigments, ochres, iron oxides. In this example from the Nuba of Sudan, this is photography taken by James Faris from the early 70s. So this part of the world currently, which is South Sudan, is of course a part of the world in a desperate state of warfare, but I'm going to use ethnographic present for describing what's happening. We see the exchange and application of cosmetics which underpinned an entire social and economic order. So a young Nuba woman on the left there is dressing every day. Her dress every day is with a fresh coating of ochre, which will be a deep red colour or a vibrant yellow according to her clan, which is a patriclan. Though amongst the Nuba, there's very complicated duolineal kinship systems. This is applied for her by her future mother-in-law. So this is a gathering of these young women of the clan with their mothers-in-law coming to dress them in ochre. And that ochre has been supplied for her by her fiancé, so the son of the woman who's doing this. So we're now in a world that's a million miles away from an Anglo-Saxon Puritan attitude regarding adornment as trivial and superficial. Think of the English meaning of cosmetic. Okay. In fact, the term cosmetics derives from a Greek word, kosmos, the plural form of which means ornaments or adornment. This word conveys the idea of a whole universe or cosmos and order opposed to chaos. In the classical Greek worldview, ordered arrangement gave rise to a sense of both morality and beauty, so it's aesthetics and ethics. The cultural anthropologist term cosmology similarly links moral and symbolic systems to schematic order in the world. And of course, cosmetics are so important that men do it too. We have examples here from the Maasai, where men, the Maasai warriors who guard the cattle and steal cattle, they are the ones who really do the red ochre in this part of the world. A Nuba man body painted the fantastic Nuba body art that James Forrest recorded. And actually, it's mainly in this part of the world, with our Anglo-Saxon heritage, Puritan heritage, that frowns on men decorating themselves, but most everywhere else it's absolutely normal. However, universally, women and girls growing up use cosmetics and their preparation and application for sharing experience, for bonding, for teaching each other and learning, and especially passing down the generations at occasions like initiation, occasions like initiation for a young woman. So we have an example from the Mendes, Sierra Leone, and again, young Maasai woman at initiation. And what is the fundamental? Obviously, these forms are extremely various. We've got all kinds of different decoration and display. But the fundamental message at the bottom of all this is the young woman is valued. She's cared for by a community, and she's being integrated into that community. Okay. One of the things worth saying here is in the use of these types of these original forms of sort of cosmetics, it is always being done by a collective, by people to the wearer of the cosmetics. Unless you have mirrors, it's necessary. You have to have allies to create the makeup and to create the cosmetic display. Chris said something very interesting not long ago about this motif of the mirror, which occurs often in fairy tales, in much folklore. It's a very widespread motif. And we can say some more perhaps in the questioning. But a mirror is something that enables you to do cosmetics by yourself. And therefore, in the theme in folklore, the motif in folklore may well be I would interpret it in terms of women who are cut off from their kin. It is the exact opposite of what's being seen here. These women are not cut off, they're being linked in to a whole social network. And when these preparations, very costly and laborious preparations for the making of the preparations of the adornments themselves, perhaps days and weeks of work, and then they are being displayed through ritual and dramatic performances which take centre stage. Not only do these women transform themselves individually, creating coalitions and alliances, but through collective experience and empowerment, they also transform the entire world around them, the cosmos around them. They ensure the rain is going to fall. They make the fields fruitful. They ensure the hunt is going to be successful. These are my Toko girls in a Hadza initiation, and I was involved in the preparation of all these bead ornaments that have been created for them. Himba women during a pre-wedding nuptial ceremonies, invoking animals in the wedding ceremonies, and I think this is a Ghanaian example. I don't know so much about. Okay, so let's now, having tried to dispel any idea that cosmetics are somehow frivolous, just kind of womanly, unimportant matters, let's start to have a look at the archaeology of symbolic media in human origins. And we can compare to what we heard from Chris Stringer last term. We have there the lineage of modern human fossils, early Homo sapien fossils, against a timeline. We now have Jebel Uhud at a quite early date, the Moroccan fossil, which is put at the beginning of the emergence of modern humans, with these as usually designated the very first totally modern humans, the Ethiopian Homo and Herto, in the period 200 to 150,000 years ago. We have a record, the earliest, oldest symbolic, durable, well, let's say it's arguable about symbolic, but the earliest durable media, the earliest material which is repeatedly found in the archaeological record are these iron oxides, ochres, primarily hematite, blood red versions of iron oxide. And the Pinnacle Point site on southern African coast, these examples of the ochre crayons there. So there has been a recent focus with the increasing emergence of symbolic materials from Africa going back in time towards the period of our emergence, our speciation, which is really from 300 to 200,000 years ago. It's looking at the idea of ritual body art and arguments about whether this material is involved in ritual. In fact, the earliest evidence in archaeology of symbolic activity is this cosmetic industry focused on red pigments. And this reaches back over 300,000 years in Africa, Kapsurin, Kenyan site, Twin Rivers, Zambian site. In fact, it's older, and I'm going to show you what seems to be the very oldest site with cosmetics well documented, or ochres well documented. This is the amazing site of Vanderwerk Cave in the Northern Cape of South Africa, which is it's formed by a river that's come deep inside a hill, like more than 150 metres deep inside a big hill. There have been mine workings here, but this whole space, this great aircraft hangar space, is formed by an old river. This site is remarkable for a number. The dating is not absolutely accurate. We're looking at 500,000 years to 300,000 years. But it's remarkable for a number of aspects of cutting-edge modernity, even though this may be preceding Homo sapiens in terms of hominin populations. They have equivalent of Levallois core tools, as well as having Acheulean tools. So these are very advanced in terms of technology. They have the world's first stone-tipped half-did spears at something like 500,000 years ago. And we have utilised, definitely anthropogenic, utilised ochres and specularite. I'm going to show you what is specularite. Because the site is so deep underground in a space that you could not really use it unless it were lit, unless it were being artificially lit with some kind of torches or fire, it is hard to make an argument that these materials were for anything else except some sort of visual display. It is really, the setting is such that it really looks as though it has to be some kind of ritual context. Now, these materials may not look that exciting, but I'm going to get really excited. They really are the world's oldest cosmetics, as far as we've found. And our colleague, Ian Watts, who's one of the experts on ochre all in Africa, in southern Africa, but all over the world, really, has tried to find where does the material in Vanderwerk bottom out. Is there a point where we can go further down into the Acheulean, which is the Homo erectus kind of layers, and there isn't anything there? But above that, yes, you start to find the utilised materials. And there are these two materials. Now, there's a number of sites, Van der Werk and a couple of other, Cathupan, Canteen-Copier. Specularite has been found, specularite material. Specularite is a version of iron oxide of hematite, but it comes up with this glitter. In the ethnographic record, there is no use of specularite except for visual display. It has no utilitarian purpose. Similarly, well, the hematite, this may not look, if you switch off the light or turn the lights a bit low, you can see a bit more on the colour. But this colour, when it comes up with water or fat, will be a beautiful, vibrant red. Hematite can be used for other things than display. It can, but the persistent, consistent choice in the Forrest Smith here and in the Middle Stone Age that follows in the African archaeology is to keep choosing the most saturated blood-coloured reds. And that choice, that selective criterion, comes right down to the present, into the recent historic past for the Khoisan peoples of southern Africa. So, yes, there are utilitarian uses, perhaps for hafting. Particularly, we saw those hafted spears were being used at Van der Werk for hafting with this material. But why does it have to be red? You could grab whatever version of the material you had close by. You don't have to go far distances to gather the reddest and most, most attractive materials. So Ian Watts makes a strong argument about why this material it's connected to visual display, and the space and the context in which it's been used, it appears to be one where really it's not for utilitarian, it's for something display, it's for something ritualistic. So our dating here is upwards of 300,000. It is pre-Homo sapiens, this material. So it's looking at the ancestors to us and the Neanderthals that are using materials of this kind. One thing to say about the specularite, I'm not sure if I said it, maybe repeating myself, some of that material has been moved perhaps 100, 120 kilometres. So whether that happened by people kind of exchanging along chains or actually going 120 kilometres to fetch it, whichever way, that is an extraordinary distance at this time, archaeologically. So this stuff mattered. It's not just lying around. And if we come forward in time to the Middle Stone Age, I showed you a couple of examples from Pinnacle Point, which is about 160,000 on the coast of southern Africa. Blombos Cave has been a very famous site right on the southern tip coast of southern Africa. Site opened up by Chris Henshelwood. He's talked to us about how when they first came into the Blombos site, they found that two people, himself and I think Karen van Neerkerk, were there on the site, and they had this table or a kind of rock surface where the ochre had been being used and prepared. And when they first lifted off the layers and it was exposed to the air, this was a vivid red. Unfortunately, nobody took a photograph of it because within a couple of hours it had gone to a sort of grubby brown because of oxidization and so forth. Henshelwood was looking for where was the ochre on the site, and he eventually discovered it hidden in little cubby holes. It had been put in special places to keep it safe. So quite clearly, the ochre was one of the most valued materials by these Blombos people. Whoops. And these are examples of the famous geometric engravings which have been found back to a date of at least 100,000 years in Blombos. The ochre goes deeper than that in Blombos, but these geometric engraved pieces, I think this one was one that Ian Watts himself picked up, wasn't it? It was this. They have been marked quite deliberately with specific designs, and famously this piece, this one's not quite as old as the oldest. At the time it was discovered, it was termed the world's oldest art. It's about 76,000 years ago, this dated piece. That's only about a couple of inches. That's tiny, that little piece there. But it's been engraved with this geometrics. So people got very excited about that. At the time it was unearthed, about the year 2000, so it's quite a long time ago now. But at that time, there was very little evidence in the African record for definite kind of symbolic artifacts. And so that's why they got so excited about this as the world's oldest art. But more than that has come from Blombos. Blombos has produced paint kits with abalone or big shells where applicators and mixing for specific colours have been found and demonstrated. If we have a look, or our Himba girl is modelling the actual grinding, the process of grinding ochre using grindstone and then adding either water or fats, and she's also wearing the ochre for us beautifully, which shows what it looks like. And we have a collection through the Middle Stone Age from, the dates here range 120 through 80,000 years of these ochre crayons. They're really quite small, very well-defined pieces with surfaces where powder has been ground onto something, skin, hide, something to create, and they can create fine design. Ian Watts argues that this sort of facets on these small pieces are not being used to produce large amounts of powder for utilitarian purposes of producing insecticides or producing hafting for weapons or anything. They're being used for paint and fine design, is his argument. And this material is so valued, or was so valued, that it was the first material that people dug mines for. We have the example of Lion Cavern from Swaziland. And Lion Cavern is over 80,000 years old. It stretches right back to the Middle Stone Age. More than 100,000 tons of pigment had been removed from these traditional workings before any commercial work started in the last century. This is an Australian example, just because it's an amazing visual example. Ormiston Gorge is Central Australia, Arunta country. And still to this day, it is only tribal owners of the site who can give permission for any of these valued materials to be removed. The materials are understood to have potency. They're not just something you can go and pick up. You've got to be the right person, the right place, the right time to be able to do that. Okay, and then the particularly interesting, moving from the durable media of earth pigments into the next manifestation of symbolic culture, and the focus is still on beauty, cosmetics, adornment. So this is our next, and some people accept as indisputably symbolic materials. Well, I think everybody accepts as indisputably symbolic materials. The range of dates of this shell jewellery goes back, well, it could be even older than 100,000, because the Shkul Kafse, the Palestine-Israeli examples, are possibly as old as 120,000 years old. What is really interesting is we have these examples of shell jewels with the same type of bead of shell, tick shells, Nassarius shells, all the way around the coast of Africa, right up to the Near East, to the Levant. Morocco, Algeria, Southern Africa, and a number of these examples show marking with a residue of red coming from some rubbing with ochre, some kind. The Nassarius shells have a natural perforation, but they've been able to demonstrate, Derrico and his colleagues have been able to demonstrate the rubbing of sinews of string against the openings of the shells to show that they definitely were man-made, woman-made necklaces. The red as well, you can see the reddening of some of these shells, which happens in the Blombos example and also the Moroccan examples. But apparently this is not merely a case of, we can see the shells, these are conus shells, but we can see the shells being rubbed against the ochre skin, but apparently the red residue on some of the Blombos shells was heat treated to make them reddened. So they were seeking that colour and deliberately creating it. So that's a resume on the type of early shell jewellery in Africa, and we also have a couple of Neanderthal examples. I'm not really going to talk much about Neanderthals. If anyone wants to ask me questions, that's fine. What's interesting about them, these are conus shells from a burial at Border Cave that now has quite an old date. They're very similar. So we have, if we look at the overview of the earliest symbolic materials, more than 300,000 years, a continuous usage of earth pigments focused on blood red with the sparkly stuff as well, and then the shell jewellery with remarkable, if we compare with the Neanderthals, we have actually the same sequence as well. There are differences with Neanderthals and modern humans, but it's basically the same sequence. And then when you come into aurignation is the industry that accompanies modern humans that come for the first time into Europe by these various routes. And in the aurignation period, which is over 40,000 years ago, we're suddenly seeing an extraordinary difference and variety. Whereas previously we were really looking at something very conservative and similar, suddenly really variety. Part of that could be from the impact of modern humans and Neanderthals meeting, because some of these styles, the fox teeth kind of styles of these, seem to have come and been pioneered by Neanderthals. If you look at the equivalent of aurignation for the Neanderthals, the Châtelperronian, they will show examples of these. But another argument made by Francesca Dorico, Manu van Heren, is to say that these are expressing ethnic, tribal differences, identities, and that there's a sort of real breakdown of diversity happening at this time period in the Upper Paleolithic of Europe. Just to have a quick look at the Upper Paleolithic material as well. So we're coming now below, in fact this is Gravettian, so it's now below 30,000 years of age. It's much more recent than the African material, about a third of the age of the African material here. But what I'm pointing to is the focus, again, symbolic focus on decoration, ornament, as something that is ritual. It is an aspect, a marker of rituals, rites of passage, moments in which people are being created in their identity in their social world. So this famous Venus of Willendorf, a small figure that you can fit into your hand, she has this elaborated hairdo, tiny little jewellery on her wrists. She appears naked, but she's not. She's dressed with beautiful jewellery. Venus of Lepug over there, mammoth ivory, with this dress, or is it a dress? Is it some sort of skirt under the very enlarged buttocks? Or is it some sort of symbolic flow connected to a ritual of initiation? Brassampui, more ivory with beautiful hairdos. There are many, many examples of these Upper Paleolithic so-called Venus figurines with all kinds of ditzy, delicate little brassieres, little belts, little ornaments placed onto female figures of varying sizes and descriptions. But there may be, we can't be sure of what something like Venus of Willendorf represents. But if I was looking at it through the lens of Bushman or Khoisan art, her size is emblematic of potency. its power connected to some kind of ritual practice. At this time period in the Upper Paleolithic, textiles were being developed, and people like Olga Sofer and her colleagues argue that what is being celebrated with this kind of focus on design of sort of beautiful hair, beautiful coiffures, beautiful delicate ornaments is a very skilled craft labour industry, which presumably was being produced by women to a large degree. Actually, I'm going to skip over this slide because it's kind of coming from another lecture. Only just a notice of the iconography here in the rock art. It isn't obvious, but it's almost like writing. These are emblems for female, just a woman, just 2 lines like that. And then if we go here, we see it again in examples of sculptures, again, little mammoth ivory sculptures from the Ukraine. Straight line buttocks, that's German, and Lalinde and Dordogne, straight line buttocks, really lean and mean, very efficiently produced. What I'm pointing to is the abstract use of the lines to suggest something about ritual, repetition, potency, some sort of vibrancy or power in the art. Female coalitions, woman with baby on her back. These Mejin examples, this is quite interesting because it is the iconography of female, but it also can be compared to what are known as falliform. You could also flip the gender from female to think of it as a male form. But it's remarkable for these very delicate, really elaborated, repeated abstract patterns. It's a long way away from the Blombos geometrics that we were looking at 100,000 or 70,000 years ago. This dating is in the order of 20,000 years. Maybe that's about 15. Gunnersdorf, I'm not quite sure what the Gunnersdorf. We're now a long way, much later, and in Europe, and it's a long way away, Ukraine. But something about this, what is the abstract design for in representing another world, ritual repetition in accessing that other world? That would be my argument about cyclicity, return, renewal, these kinds of arguments. Clearly, it's cosmetic design in relation to ritual. Okay, so last section here is to consider why. Can we find a theory? Well, we do have some theory. I'm going backwards here through the evidence from ethnographic to archaeological to an argument from Darwinian theory about what's happening with this sequence of the emergence of symbolic culture. Why red? Why was the most blood-coloured hematite seemingly a substance valued like gold in the earliest human societies, the earliest symbolic human societies? So to answer that, we need to go back to theories before culture, the theories that deal with animal behaviour and sexual selection, Darwinian theories of sexual selection, just like the peacock that I was showing at the beginning. And we need to think about the theories of sexual selection in relation to the evolution of those human societies. So it's in the last million years, in the last 500,000 years, that symbolic materials like the earth pigments were appearing in the archaeological record. Okay, there's none of it here, there's none of it there, it's that part. So what is the key issue, the prime issue of human evolution at that point is this extraordinary, absolutely extraordinary rate of encephalization. Okay. We start off with Australopithecines, 3 million, 2 million years ago, with fundamentally chimp-sized brains. We have nothing resembling symbolic culture. There's no reason why the mothers of Australopithecines wouldn't have been able to get on with looking after their own offspring just the way that chimpanzees do, because they have the same kinds of body sizes and the same kinds of brain sizes, the same kind of reproductive costs. 2 million years ago, big jump. We've got twice chimpanzee brain size. This has been described as a grey ceiling by Carol van Scheidt and Karen Isler. It is basically impossible for a great ape to raise an offspring with a brain size like this by herself. Single mums can't do it anymore. They have to have help. This is where Sarah Hrdy's Mothers and Others comes into operation. We have to envisage early genus Homo as having cooperative childcare, fundamentally in the first place from female relatives, hence grandmother theory, grandmother hypothesis. This remains fairly steady, and that support structure of female coalitions with increasing domestication of male help and investment probably works for Homo erectus, and we don't get any evidence of symbolic materials going on there. It is in this increase of brain size with the species that I've still labelled Homo heidelbergensis that is when we can expect symbolic materials. And my argument is the reason for the symbolic materials is that they are a signalling system whereby females are extracting and pushing males to invest far more reliably and far more regularly, enabling females to raise offspring with these very large brain sizes. In case anyone's confused about that, the very large brains are extraordinarily expensive. I hope everybody understands that. Having brain sizes of this three times chimpanzee, and this is a level of expansion. It's like an exponential expansion of the most expensive tissue that we have in our body, one of the most expensive tissues that we have in our body. It's extraordinarily expensive for mothers. So the mothers of these fossil specimens had to get help, increasingly so.
Say what you mean by expensive?
In terms of costs of energy, the amount of food they required to be able to produce through breastfeeding to raise those offspring and then to feed children. Okay, so that's our problem. That's the thing that counted. So how did females do that? What was the signalling that they used? How did they extract the extra energy from males? How did they get the males involved? And this is where our sexual selection really comes into play. We have the evidence in our bodies today of what is the sexual signals that we've ended up with in our reproductive system. Okay, so what we have is a very cunning. Women really hide ovulation from men. They are extraordinary in their ability to have sex at virtually any time of the cycle, be interested in sex at virtually any time of the cycle, much more so than any other primate. And this makes us, for males, well, we really are time wasters. I mean, we really waste males' time. If the male idea of finding a fertile female, doing the job, and moving on to the next one is kind of the male ideal in a Darwinian world, well, we are just messing up that game. And that's what we've been designed for. There are all kinds of other things going on with hiding ovulation about making sure that infanticide risk is reduced as well. That may be a very ancient reason for the hiding of ovulation. Okay, so ovulation's gone. I mean, it's possible that there is some evidence that men, if they're really up close and personal, can tell the difference between coming up to ovulation and when a woman is past ovulation. But they've got to be really up close and personal, and they've really got to stick around. And that's the whole point here, that a man, if he's going to have a chance of being the one there at the right time to get the woman pregnant, he's got to stick around. He can't just turn up on a day. He's not going to know which day. There's some signal, there's some sign, though this is very much debated, that there's a design of synchrony with some link to an ecological zeitgeist by the lunar cycle in the length of the average menstrual cycle for the most fertile years of a woman's reproductive careers. Also, the fact that pregnancy seems to be a factor, a multiple of that. So there's a sort of lunar factor in there. Synchrony is, again, useful for undermining the ability of any male to monopolize female fertility. The more that females synchronize, the more males come into the system, because any one male is occupied with one female, other males can guard other females. So synchrony is a good idea if females want to make sure that there's more than one male in the system. But there's still a very significant cue in our signalling. And this is menstruation. And there's all kinds of interesting things about the reason for the evolution of menstruation that I'm not talking about at the moment. But it's there in our heritage. It belongs to other great apes. It belongs to all the anthropoids, monkeys and apes. But if the other great apes have estrous signals which mark their moments of fertility, menstruation is not so interesting for males. Males are focused on the moments of fertility. If you remove the sign of ovulation, or any obvious cue of ovulation, menstruation becomes extremely interesting as far as males are concerned. From a Darwinian perspective, it now becomes the only reliable cue a female isn't pregnant, means she can be made pregnant in the near future. Okay. So menstruation is a big deal. In a Darwinian world, absolutely no male can ignore that information. If a male is interested in finding a fertile female, that becomes the salient marker. So this is just an illustration of you've concealed ovulation and all in sync. This is a nice idea. In principle, we wouldn't need to worry about menstruation if we could do this. Unfortunately, it's very clockwork. It would never have been a reality in populations of evolving hominin females, because hominins, our ancestors, would have had intervals between births, 3 or 4 years. Any one of these females might have lost her child, infant mortality. She comes back to cycling again the next year, while the other females are going on and having their children, and So in any particular year, in a group of females, some will be cycling, some will be pregnant, some will be breastfeeding. Okay. Which means that in a kind of hunter-gatherer fertility group of females, menstruation is quite rare. It's not that frequent. It really marks the female out. And the capacity for synchrony is going to be rather limited for actual synchrony, though seasonality may be an important factor in increasing synchrony as a dynamic. So we can envisage this situation as a regular occurrence. It's going to be occurring again and again and again. It would have been occurring way back with Homo erectus already 2 or more million years ago, but with Homo erectus, perhaps because the brain sizes are not so large, females can just kind of ride it out. They're not, okay, there might be a bit of disturbance, but they can just kind of ride it out. They're looking after themselves anyway, pretty much. Menstruation, a girl in a coalition, a woman in a coalition, she's probably a relative, a kin relative of these others, but it instantly puts her in potential conflict, all the females in potential conflict with each other, or the non-cycling females with the menstruating female, because she now has the potential to pull investment away from the ones who are pregnant and breastfeeding who really need the investment. Conflict amongst the females, similar conflict amongst the males. They're all of them interested in, oh, she's the one. Right. So what do? They've got to do something about it. They've got to solve that dilemma. First of all, they need to grab the girl. They can't just let her go waltzing around and get grabbed and taken off on safari by some would-be alpha male. They don't want, she is a valuable, hot property, and they don't want to let her go. They've got two choices, really two choices. And these choices kind of define almost every culture in the world has to deal with menstruation in one of these ways. Either hide it and pretend it's not there and nobody's allowed to know about it, what our culture does, or what hunter-gatherer cultures do, make a huge, big cosmetic display out of it. And this is much more what hunter-gatherer cultures do, and this, I'm arguing, is what our Middle Stone Age foremothers would have been doing. Now, what's the dynamic here? Creating a female coalition by borrowing the blood of other actual cycling females and then augmenting that with cosmetics as this regular kind of ritualistic performance became a regularized feature, eventually augmenting with materials like mineral oxides, like ochres. Okay, this is a display of female coalitionary solidarity, saying to the males, you are not going to pick one of us, you have to deal with all of us. If you're going to try and hunt and bring back meat, it comes back to the entire coalition. You don't just single out one menstruating girl and take her off. No. That's their message. Their message is also to say that you want to hunt for our, beautiful menstruating girl. Well, look, she's got this coalition of women who are going to be looking after her babies. So this is a sexual selection display by the females. Let's look at what the male side. I've put those question marks in these males. I don't think they're that fooled necessarily. Probably know pretty well who really is menstruating and who isn't, although when you see it like that, you can't be quite so sure. But in terms of the males, this display is really changing the world in terms of any male who is going to try and bust in there and grab one of those females, the one that's menstruating, he's being outlawed by this. Whereas the other guys who are very much prepared to do the work, investing, doing work, hunting, bringing back meat to a camp, a coalition of females, it is absolutely in their interest to choose females who do this, to start sexually selecting cosmetically, ritually decorated females. Why? Because they are saying, we aren't dealing with would-be alpha dominant males. We are only dealing with males who are investors. So it is totally in the interest of investing males to be on the side of those females. And so we are kind of changing the whole playing field here. The old alpha male, call him Donald Trump or whatever you want to, he's just going to be out in his ear. This is now entering a phase of, excuse me, and a cough, of a much more egalitarian reproductive success for males. They got to work for it, but they all kind of get their equal chances of sex and we could associate this, if we just go back to our brain chart, sorry. So I would associate an advent of significant pair bonding with that increase of brain size and the beginnings of something like a symbolically structured sexual division of labour, incorporating what we see with African hunter-gatherers to this day, what's called bride service, that a man has to hunt to get access to his would-be wife. He's got to produce meat that is basically owed to his in-laws, his mother-in-law. His mother-in-law is his boss. Okay. And in those, there's female coalition. Mother-in-law is in there with menstruating female, extracting the meat from the guy. Okay, and this gets quite raunchy with the... So this, the sexual, the dynamic here is one of very sexy display with dancing, singing. We've made the arguments of wrong sex, wrong species. These females have to say no. They have to be able to resist any male advance. They're establishing themselves as inviolable, taboo, under a kind of spell. They can't be touched. It's look, don't touch. And they're trying to be as sexy as possible to motivate males to go and do the job, to go and do the work. And what is it that males are choosing? Obviously, the males are interested in particular young, fertile, beautiful maidens, young initiates, but they are also interested in the young women who have the coalitionary network that ensures that their offspring are going to be cared for. And those are the females that they will want to invest in. So we're going to have sexual selection in humans going both ways. Sexual selection of men by women, obviously, but also a very strong angle of sexual selection of women by men. And we can justify that on Darwinian grounds. Just to say, the Himba are not Khoisan, they're not actually Bushman populations, but there is a lot of evidence. I just don't have the same sort of pictorial... the Himba are such incredible models with the ochre. We have here a Nama Khoi woman with a very traditional mask of ochres. All the Khoisan populations utilise ochres very significantly, particularly ochre. Red ochre has significance for ceremonial. The metaphor for a ritual being performed is that women are pounding ochre. Women do it. Women pounding the ochre and then applying it. Not only women will wear ochre, men as well, as part of ritual performances, healing rituals. But the occasion when ochres are most of all used for the Khoisan, in the work of Ian Watts, he's identified first menstruation, as an occasion when ochre is, or hematite, particularly blood red ochre, is a vital ingredient, and it's used for disseminating the power, distributing. She is conceived as having this extraordinary potency when she is first menstruating that enables that girl to be the sort of focus for moving the whole community into what's known as first creation. But to be able to, there have to be many observances, hedging around, making sure that her power is very carefully guarded and very carefully observed and very carefully protected against. All those ideas that go with henna about the evil eye, protection, a kind of medicine against some too great power, potency, seems to apply in the case also with the Khoisan ochre applied to menarcheal ritual. So a girl at menstruation is a dangerous thing. She's dangerous with power. And we can understand from a Darwinian point of view why that should be. But as long as the rituals are performed in the right way, then all will be well with the world, the cosmos will turn, the animals will be fertile, the rains will fall, it will work. Specularite. Because specularite seems to be as old, I mean, it is a form of hematite, but this is the other thing apart from the blood red. This emphasis of the you could think of it as kind of eyeshadow, the glitter. We could align it perhaps to the idea of the dark moon and the starry sky. Famous stories all over the world, coming from hunter-gatherer populations all over the world. This is the constellation of the Pleiades, the Seven Sisters. And there are ancient stories about the Seven Sisters, the notion of this female coalition with tales of sisterly solidarity in defiance of male exploitation found on every continent among hunter-gatherers. The magic the sisters use is a form of beauty magic to withdraw from their badly behaved husbands by transforming themselves into stars in the sky, visible but tantalizingly out of reach. So this is the whole idea. Look, don't touch. Inviolability, taboo. Getting the males interested and excited, but they can't have any sex. They can't reach the sisters. Okay, so really quickly, this is just a bit provocative and a little bit of kind of fun, but to think about this, we've been on a journey to worlds far away in time and space. Things seem to happen very differently from the types of cosmetics use that we are familiar with in daily life. But I'm going to question if it's actually so different. Because 100,000 or 200,000 or 300,000 years do not get wiped out overnight in the short history of capitalism and commodification. This is such a deep-going part of our heritage and of our psychology that we're not going to just lose it like that. It is the case, I'm making the argument, that it is the fundamental cultural species marker of our species. Wherever Homo sapiens goes around the planet, it takes those they take those cosmetics with them and have been using those ever since. Women everywhere do it. And if we look at, we've got a few images of girls, bunches of girls. A lot of these are like Facebook or Instagram. I just grabbed off the internet. I'm sorry for anybody who's been ripped off. Girls getting ready to go out. And we can see the same fundamental psychologies, mechanisms and motivations at work. One of these pictures, and I challenge you to say which one, is a posed photo with models. The rest are real, they're real people. So one of them is an ad, and can you tell which is? Anybody got an idea? Which one? That one? Yeah, the two there. It's quite clever ad because it doesn't have just one, with, of course, the emphasis in Western culture of, women in some sort of competition with cosmetics, doing it for themselves, by themselves. We've got the mirror there. I was saying something about the mirror. She actually, the girl at the back is carrying a very interesting menstrual glass of wine there. But actually, she's completely overshadowed. And she's actually redundant because of the mirror. This really pretty girl in front is completely overshadowing her. In all the other pictures, you cannot say anyone is overshadowed. They're all supporting each other and supported by each other. There is, in fact, a famous psychological phenomenon known as the cheerleader effect. The cheerleader effect is such that a woman who's in a group and photographed and shown and displaying in a group becomes more beautiful. She averages up. Everybody averages up. If you're by yourself, you're less beautiful. This makes perfect sense in the light of everything I've been saying. Female cosmetic coalitions, you become more beautiful as part of a group. These girls are making the most of that effect. What you're sure about is that, in all these other pictures, the girls are really sound, they're really solid. They have they're showing a sort of impossible to fake solidarity with each other because they are friends because they put on their makeup together. But by putting on their makeup together, they become friends. It's like an interactive process, those two things. And so each girl is not, they're not all the same. They're not all clones. They've got their own angle. They're like each a star in the constellation. They're chiming in with a whole group vibe, but they're each their own. So can girls who are going out on the town in Brixton or Birmingham really be recreating the actions of our ancestral foremothers, establishing the very first taboos and laws of human culture, using ritual cosmetic display. Sounds a bit far-fetched, but I think so. What's the main message that those girls are sending by making themselves up together as gorgeously as this? They're saying, boys, watch out, watch your step. If you want to have anything to do with us, you're going to treat us with respect, because we have the confidence and the solidarity to deal with you.
The Spice Girls song.
Is it? Boys, watch out. Right, okay.
You want to be friends with me, you have to be friends with our friends.
Exactly. I think there is also an effect of you get yourself as dolled up as possible altogether, and then you trash yourselves altogether. But that's the kind of costly signal effect as well, which somebody should really do some anthropological projects on this. You know, this is the stuff of PhDs, this is. So it really is that simple. The first and most basic rule of human culture, laid down every evening or weekend in bars across the land by bunches of girls and lasses, using the simplest material medium for creating ritual solidarity, makeup. That's it.